Masechet Nedarim Daf Samich Tet, a rather short daf today with a series of questions by Rava. Here's one of them in the printed edition. It says Rava here. The second one, it says Rabbah. The third one, it says Rabbah. And the fourth one that we're going to see today says Rabbah, and then another one we're going to see tomorrow also says Rabbah. So in the printed edition, it starts with Rabbah and the rest are Rabbah. However, in manuscripts, there's a lot of other differences. My guess is that they all intend to be Rabbah of the fourth generation of Amoraim, and not Rabbah, the third generation. But whoever it is, it's probably all the same person, but simply a variant spellings. Because even Rabbah, you could spell Rabbah and the other way around. And so they do generally refer to two different sages, but the spellings are not consistent, and that's why you get something like this. All right, so whoever it is, either the third generation Rabbah or the fourth generation Rava asking, the question is as follows: Yesh she'ela behakem or en she'ela behakem? When a woman makes a vow, and she's married, or a girl, and her father can annul the vow. So in these cases, the father, let's say the father, and she's 12, has a number of choices, 3 choices. One, he can annul the vow, say this vow is annulled. He does it on the same day, there's no more vow. The other choice is he can keep quiet and do nothing, and once the day passes, then the vow will be in effect. Or the third thing he could do is ratify the vow. That's hakim. Hakim, he hears the vow, says, that's a good vow. Yes, I want my daughter to keep that vow. In that case, now he bound himself to not nullify it. And so, therefore, if he says this vow is hakim, is ratified, and then afterwards he wants to nullify it, he can't just say, oh no, I changed my mind, I nullify it, because he already ratified it. That would be like on the next day trying to nullify it. That's it. It's already bound. So now Rava's question is: can the father go and try to undo his ratification? So, for example, the daughter made a vow, I'm not going to stay up late past 10 p.m. The father said, oh, that's a good vow. You can go to sleep early. But then, and so he said, he ratified it. But then he realized that, but I need her on Saturday nights to stay up late so she can babysit. And so he wants to go to the Chacham and say, I want to undo my ratification. After all, a ratification is kind of like a vow in itself, right? I'm authorizing that vow. I'm putting my stamp of approval. So that's kind of creating the vow. And so you might think that just like you can undo a vow, you can also do the ratification. And then once it's undone, he can then nullify the vow. Or no, do we say there's no such thing? You can annul a vow, but you can't annul a ratification. Once he says, I like the vow, then it's enforced and cannot be changed. That's question number 1. And if we say that, yes, one can annul a ratification, fine, then what about, can a father annul his annulment and or not? So, for example, the daughter says, I'm not going to stay up past 10 p.m., and the father thinks, oh, no, that's a bad one. I need you to babysit sometimes. I annul the vow. But then he realizes, you know what? It really would be good for her to be on a regular schedule. That's more important than the babysitting. I didn't realize that when I annulled the vow. I want to undo my nullification. I'll go to the Chacham and say that which I said that it's annulled, that itself should be annulled. And instead, I want to let the vow be go forward. Okay, the reason why the second question is within the first question is that it makes more sense to say one can annul a ratification, because that's a positive statement, creating a vow. So then you could think, well, just like you can annul a vow, you can annul a ratification. But to annul an annulment is a lot harder to conceptualize, because once you annul the vow, there is no more vow, it's zero. And so the annulment is just a lack of something. It's harder to undo a lack of something than to undo a positive thing. All right, that is Rava's question, and we actually have an answer. Tashema damar Rabbi Yochanan nishalin al hakem ve'en nishalin al hefer. Rabbi Yochanan, who actually lives earlier than Rava, Rabbi Yochanan is a second generation Amora in Eretz Yisrael. So it's not likely that Rabbi Yochanan was answering Rava's question, but Rabbi Yochanan happened to address the same issue, and he said, yes, you can annul a ratification, but you cannot annul an annulment. And that makes a lot of sense, as we just explained. Ba'e Rava, kayam lichi, v'nish'al halakama rishona mahu. The second of Rava's questions is, if the daughter makes a vow, and then the father says, that is ratified to you, it is ratified to you. He said it twice. So do we consider that like two separate ratifications? Or is it once it's ratified, then you can't re-ratify it, right? It it's not adding anything. And so the application would be, let's say he does go and nullifies the ratification. We just said that you can nullify that ratification. So if he nullifies the first ratification, what do we say? Is the second one still there? Or the second one, or since they're all one, the second one is not there either? To give an analogy, is it like two locks on a door, right? Some doors have two locks. I lock one, I lock the second one. So these are two separate things. Even if I unlock the first one, still the second one will be locked and will not be able to open the door. Or is it like shutting the door, right? If I shut the door once, then pushing it closed again is not going to do anything more. It's just checking to make sure. And so in that case, if I open the door, right, closing it twice, pushing it closed twice is not going to add anything to it. So that would be a similar question here. If I say ratified, is that two ratifications, like a double lock? And in that case, if I go and annul the first ratification, doesn't help because it's still ratified by the second lock. Or is it once it's ratified, that's it, ratified, that's the status, and saying it again does not add anything, in which case, if I nullify the first, then the whole thing is nullified. Oh, we have an answer to this too. Tashema damarava im nish'al larishona sheniya hala alav. If he ratifies the first, then the second one does still apply. So that's the answer. Yes, it's like two separate locks by saying ratified. Ba'e Rava. Third question. Kayam lichi umufad lichi vela techol hakama Ela imken hala hafara mahu. So Rava asks, if the father said, it is ratified for you, it is nullified for you. He says two opposite things back to back. First he says it's ratified, and then he said it's nullified. Now if he only says that, it would be ratified, because once you ratify it, you can't nullify it, right? So if he stopped there, that would be a simple case. It's more complicated because he keeps going. And he says, Vela techul hakama, ela imken chala hafara. But he's saying all this within one statement. The ratification should not apply unless the nullification applies. So this is a kind of a paradox. Because now as you're reading this, you want to say, oh, ratified. Okay, I guess we should ratify it. Hold on, we're kind of holding that in abeyance. But he also said nullified, and he says it will only be ratified on condition that it's nullified. Well, in that case, even though the order is ratify then nullify, and that by itself would make it ratified, but because he said no, the ratification should not kick in unless and until the nullification kicks in. Well, that sounds like it will be nullified first and then ratified, but if you nullify first, then you can't ratify anymore. Okay, so this is a good question. What do we do with this paradox here? Circular statement. Tashema mipelukta de Rabbi Meir v'Rabbi Yosef. We actually can figure out an answer from the following Mishnah in Masechet Temurah. That's going to record a machloket. The machloket between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yosef is a lengthy answer. We're going to show applies to the case of Temurah, but actually they would agree in our case. That it is in fact hafara. I'll just skip to the answer so it'll be clearer. They will agree that it is nullified because he said that it should be ratified, but only if it's nullified. So then the nullification occurs first, and that's it. It's nullified, and then the ratification afterwards has nothing to apply to. That's the answer. Let's see how we prove it. Ditnan, hadezo timurat ola utmurat shelamim. The guy has an animal. The law of timurah is, if I have one animal that is consecrated to be, let's say, an olah, and then I want to switch it for another animal, and I say this will be instead, animal B will be instead of animal A, the law is that's prohibited to do, and not only that, both of them will be sacred animals. Same thing with a shelamim. So now what he has here, he has an olah, he has a shelamim. He takes a third animal, C, and he says this animal C is going to be a temura, a substitute for an olah and for a shelamim. Now, this is kind of impossible, because how could it be a substitute for both an olah and a shelamim? It can only be one or the other. So what do we do with it? Harezot temurat olah divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, you follow the first one. He said, zot temurat olah. So that's it. It becomes a temura of olah, and that's it. You have to treat it like an olah sacrifice. And the shelamim, he said afterwards, so forget about that. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. So according to this, it's not an analogy yet. Hold on. Rabbi Yosef Omer, im lekach nitkaven metechila ho'il ve'iyefshar likrot shnei shemot ke'achad tevarav kayamin. Rabbi Yosef says, if this was his intention to begin with, that he wanted to say both, and since you can't say two things at once, therefore his words, both of them, are effective. In other words, if he meant at first to say, it'll be Tumat Olah, and then, after he said that, no, I changed my mind, I want it to be Temurat Shelamim, in that case, Rabbi Yosef would agree that what he said first is the one that applies, and that's, you can't undo it. You can't undo a Temurah. In that case, you're right, it'll be just an Olah. But if from the beginning he said, I want to make this a Temurah for both, it's just that it's impossible for us to say, Shnei Devarim b'dibur echad. Therefore, even though he says it sequentially, since he had in mind that they should both apply. In fact, both apply. Now, how do you do that? How do you apply both? Well, you can't sacrifice it as an olah and as a shelamim. What you do instead is you would sell it, and the value of it, you would use half of the value to buy an olah, and half of the value to buy another shelamim, which you can do with a temura animal. After you wait till it gets a mum, and then you get rid of it that way. Okay, so the Rabbi Yosef says both apply. Now, ואפילו רבי מאיר לא קמה דלא אמר לא תאכול זו אלא אם כן חלה זו, אבל אחד אמר לא תאכל הקמה אלא אם כן חלה הפרה, Rabbi Meir name modeh dehafara chala. But even Rabbi Meir, here's where we see now a difference between our case, where he didn't only say this is ratified, this is nullified. He also said, and the ratification should only occur if the nullification happened. So he added this phrase. And so now, with bringing it back here, we explain. Even according to the Rabbi Meir only said his law, that we follow Temura Olah, right? We follow the first phrase. That's only if he didn't add a paradoxical condition that said that the first should only apply if the second. Yeah, then you apply only the first. But if you did say this paradoxical condition, you say A and then B, and then you said, but A should not apply unless B applies. In that case, even Rabbi Meir would agree that the second one is effective. And because the second one is effective, and the second one is to nullify it, therefore the nullification takes effect. Because the nullification takes effect, the ratification has no power anymore, and it simply goes away. And so that would be the final law, as in this case. So we have actually an answer. Even though Rabbi Meir did not talk about this case, from the clarification of this Mishnah, that what Rabbi Meir would say, and if you said this paradoxical phrase, we can learn an answer. All right, and now last challenge, Ba'erava. Kayam umufarlichi bebatahat mahu. So we're really refining what we just said before. You see how each question depends on the one before and gets even more precise. Well, what if he says it's ratified and nullified simultaneously, right? That's what we're trying to get at. It's like a particle collider. We're trying to bring the ratification and nullification against each other at the very same time. We couldn't, beforehand, we said, well, whatever you do first, that's the one that will kick in. So we tried by using this paradoxical formula that the first won't apply without the second. Well, then we answered that. Then the second applies and not the first. Okay, what if he says simultaneously, I want them both to apply? Then what are you going to do? Mahu, tashema damaraba, kol davar, She'eno beze achar ze, afilu babat achat eno. So apparently he answered his own question by explaining that anything where that you cannot do one after the other, then you can also not do it simultaneously. That's a rule that can apply in other cases as well. So it's like this. If there's such a thing that you can put A and then do B, operator A and then operator B, then if you do it simultaneously, it'll work and both of them will work. But if there's such a thing that the two operators cannot both happen one after the other, and that's true in this case. If I nullify first, then I can no longer ratify. If I ratify first, I can no longer nullify. Because I couldn't do them in sequence, so also when I say they should happen simultaneously, neither apply. And so the result would be that the status of the vow would remain as before the father said anything. Which would mean that after he says this, he says if he said nothing, throughout the rest of the day he can nullify it, or ratify it, or continue to do nothing, and then the next day it will be ratified by itself. But this statement, it is ratified and nullified at the same time, has no meaning. It's as if it was never said. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen v'Amen.